Welcome to 5 Good Minutes. You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Mark with Dan Irvin.
Welcome back to 5 Good Minutes podcast. This week as we've been walking through Mark chapter 14. And today we'll be in verses 32 through 42. And here we see Jesus nearing his arrest and ultimately the crucifixion. And what we see here in these verses is Jesus in a great amount of despair, anguish, wrestling with what was to come. In verse 34, he says this, he says, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." And later on in verse 35, going out a little farther, he fell to the ground and he prayed, if it were possible, that the hour might pass from him, pleading with God. In verse 36, continuing, "Abba, Father, all things are possible from you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Here we see Jesus understanding something, that this moment that was to come, this torment that he would go through was going to be more than gut-wrenching, something that we could not even begin to imagine. The fact that he even fell to the ground and prayed in anguish. Most in that day would pray standing up with their hands lifted high to the heavens. To fall on the ground and to pray in that manner would be a sign of just the deepest, something was going on. There was wrestling in the soul. I think we see it here with Jesus, even asking God, pleading with God as his Father, "Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Jesus realizing that while this would be hard, ultimately that God's will for him was better than anything, even though it may be hard. And I think there's something to be said here about understanding God's plan for our life, God's will for our life as the best thing, but not always the easiest thing, not always the thing that's the most pleasant. As I think back to when my kids were younger and we would go to the grocery store and they'd jump in the shopping cart and they'd always want to get the shopping cart with the steering wheel on it, and they're driving the steering wheel. And I remember always saying, okay, make sure you turn the wheel here when we get to this aisle and turn the cart. And in their mind, they're driving the car. They're driving the cart. We know they're not, but they have the illusion of they're in control. They're the ones driving the show. And ultimately, this is us. We might think that we're in control of our lives, that we're the ones calling the shots. But ultimately, we serve a God and we know a God. If we know him, if we trust him, that is in control of our lives. That if we invite him in, if we ask him to be a part of our life, that he is the one driving. And ultimately, that's a better thing for us. While we may not understand it all the time, we may not even want to know in the moment or hear in the moment that God is the one driving the car. It's better for us. And the pain that Jesus was about to experience, the anguish, the torment that he was about to go through was a result of dealing with paying the penalty for our sin, our sinfulness. You see, I think this passage is also a great illustration of the painfulness, the separation that sin causes. Jesus was feeling that in a little bit in this moment, feeling the sin of the world on his shoulders. You see, I think there's some that may think, and maybe you even thought this, I think I've been victim of thinking this in the past, that my sin doesn't matter. It only matters to maybe, to me. No one else knows about it. It's not really affecting anybody. Maybe it's not even really affecting me if I really am honest and think about that sometimes. We think we can let's just ask God to forgive me of my sin and we can move on. God is faithful. He will forgive. Yes. But when we view sin as just something that is done that we can be forgiven of, and not as something that is causing a ripple effect in our lives, in our relationships, in our families and marriages and our work. If we view sin as just an isolated incident or things that aren't having ripple effects, then I think we're missing it. I think we're missing the extreme gravity of what sin does. Sin was so serious that God needed to send his son to pay the penalty on our behalf. The penalty of sin needed to be taken away. God wants us to live in a certain way, to follow him in a way that honors him and respects him, not so that he can be the one saying, look at me, I'm in control, but because he knows it's the best way for our life. He knows it's what will lead to ultimate satisfaction in our lives.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.